Hey everyone, this is Brian from newprediction.com, and today's video is all about scatter plots in Tableau. And so I'm going to cover off on some basic stuff and then a little bit more advanced stuff as well. So we're going to get started with a basic scatter plot like you see here. I'll show you how to build this very quickly. Also going to go into something a little bit more advanced, a dynamic scatter plot. I'll also show you how to create a scatter plot with segments like you see here. We'll take a look at a time series scatter plot, look at some dots and some trends over time. Also show you how to create a scatter plot matrix to look at different data points by a couple different categories. We'll also cover off on some formatting tips and tricks. Alright, to get started here, we're going to go ahead and connect to some data. We're going to connect to the world indicators data source that comes along with Tableau by default. And you can see we've got a couple dimensions: country, region, and year. And then a whole bunch of different groups of measures: business, development, health, and population. We're going to be focusing mostly on develop. Alright, the first thing I'm going to show you is how to create a basic scatter plot in Tableau. If you don't know, scatter plots are the easiest way to compare lots of different data points against two different measures. And there are just 3 steps to create a basic scatter plot in Tableau. Number 1, we're going to drag and drop a measure into the columns card. Let's also go ahead and drag and drop a measure to the rows card. And finally, let's drag and drop a dimension field to the label section of the marks card. And there you go. Now you can see the internet usage and mobile phone usage for each country around the world. And quick reminder, if you're not familiar with measures and dimensions, just think about measures are the things that you want to measure. So this might be sales results, or it might be enrollment information, or anything that you want to actually measure about a person or place or a thing. And your dimensions are those people, places, and things. Those are the different ways that you can cut that measurement. So just a quick tip for you on the difference between dimensions and measure. Alright, so let's go ahead and rename this as a basic scatter plot and create a brand new sheet. This one we're going to rename dynamic scatter plot, and we're going to get started by creating a new parameter. We're going to call this metric 1. Data source will be a string, and the values will be a list. And really what I'm doing here is I'm taking each of these different values and putting them here in this column. The display as will populate by default automatically. So I'm just going to go ahead and type these out. Alright, so as you can see, I have all of those typed out here, and the display as is matching each of the different measures that I have here to show on my scatter plot. So let's hit OK, and you can see now I have a new parameter down here. I'm actually going to duplicate this and rename it to metric 2. And let's go ahead and show each of the parameter controls for these. So I'm going to select both of them using the control key, and let's reorganize those so they're in numerical order: metric 1, metric 2. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is create the actual measures that correspond to those parameters so that we can show them on the chart. So we're going to create a calculated field, and we're going to name this selected metric 1. Alright, and we're going to type in the values for each of the measures that we want to include in this calculation. And this is going to be done with a case statement, so go ahead and type that out. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got a case statement looking at metric 1, which is my parameter, and then whenever I select CO2 emissions from the drop-down list over here, it will return CO2 emissions from my measures. I've got 1 for each of the measures I want to include in this calculation, and that's it. Okay, so now I have that metric. I'm actually going to duplicate this and change it up so that it's looking at metric 2, both in the calculated field name and also in the parameter that it's looking for. So it works exactly the same way. It just looks for parameter 1 or parameter 2, depending on whichever you select. Okay, so now all we have to do is go ahead and create that same scatter plot like we just did. And let's go ahead and include country on the label. And now you can see that it's pulling off of these two metrics. They're the same, so you get this straight line. But if we go ahead and click on internet usage and mobile phone usage, you can see that it's dynamically set. So now you can give some interactivity and some control to your audience so they can select any metric that they want from the drop-down list, and they'll get a nice looking graph here. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is add some segments to our scatter plot. So we're going to take the same view here and actually segment it depending on as compared to the global average. So let's go ahead and duplicate this sheet. Give that a new name, scatter plots with segments. And we're going to create a new calculated field. Oops. Calculated field called metric 1 segments. And what we're going to do here is if selected metric is greater than or equal to the fixed average, then we're going to put that into segment 1, else segment If you're not familiar with level of detail or LOD calculations, basically this is just taking an average of all of the data points in the data set rather than just what's displayed or just that individual data set. Okay, we're going to go ahead and duplicate this so that it's looking at our metric 2 segments, or it's creating our metric 2 segments based on the average and global average of metric 2, whatever we pick for metric 2. Alright, so now we have got our segments created. We're going to use the control key to select both of those and drag them to the color. And now you can see here we've got 4 different colors. Let's adjust those quickly. And let's pick this internet usage and the mobile phone usage, and you can really see the segments kind of pop out here once we set this to average. Now depending on your data set, this might be a little bit cluttered. We've got a lot of data points here, so it's kind of a bit confusing. I'm going to go ahead and add in some reference lines. Again, selecting we don't want to average the average, we just want to show the average itself. And we can put a value in here, or even a custom thing, and say global average. And this will just change depending on whatever metric you select. We'll do the same thing here. And now those segments really pop out. You can see the purple, pink, blue, and the gray down here. And no matter what metric you choose, the reference lines will change, the segments will change, the colors will change, everything is dynamic in this particular scatter plot. Okay, another very useful tool when working with scatter plots is actually a time series scatter plot. And I'll show you how that works. Let's go ahead and give this a good name. We're actually going to create or connect to a new data source. The Superstore data source is much better for this example. These time series scatter plots are so useful because they will show your audience 2 different ways to look at the data in one chart. You can see the detail, or you can just see the trends depending on what they're interested in seeing. It really works very, very well. So let's start by dragging the profit ratio up to the row shelf. It's automatically aggregated because we've got the calculation inside the field. Sum of profit divided by sum of sales. Next, we're going to take the order date, right click on that, and bring it up to the column shelf, and we're going to select day, that continuous day. So now we're seeing a trended line for each day, what the sum of sales would be, or the profit ratio would be, excuse me. Alright, let's go ahead and change this to a circle type and adjust the opacity down to about 50%. And we're also going to decrease the size a little bit just to make that a little bit more of a point. something like that. Alright, next we're going to duplicate this field by hitting the Control key and dragging a new copy of that field over in the columns shelf. And we're going to make this second line, or second measure, a line chart. And we're going to change this aggregation to a week. And bump up that opacity back up to 100%. And even increase the size a little bit. Small dots that are kind of faded, and a nice bold blue line. Okay, now let's go ahead and set this as a dual axis so that one chart is on top of the other, and we are going to synchronize these axes. Let's also adjust the color here a little bit. This is definitely optional, but I like to do it. Keep things kind of consistent. Alright, now you can see that the weekly profit ratio as a trend line along with the profit ratio for each day. So this would be helpful for further research. For example, you can see that we had quite a few days, 8 days I think it is, down here with 100, negative 100 profit ratio, and it'd be interesting to figure out why that is. It didn't really impact our weekly trend, so not too big of a deal, but something that might be interesting to research further. In fact, if I know we have the order information in here, so if we right-click on Order ID and bring that into size, we're just going to do a count of our orders. You can see that we did have some small numbers down here. It's really just one order that we had on that day, and that might account for the extremely low profit ratios. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is create a Tableau scatter plot matrix. So the matrix scatter plot in Tableau, it's a great way to identify outliers across different dimensions. For example, we're going to create something that will show us which the different products that we have to sell give us higher than average sales and profits across a bunch of different categories. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to create a brand new sheet here, and we're going to drag in profit to the row shelf. Grab that, put it up there, and we're going to take sales into the column shelf. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is set the aggregation type to average for each of these. And we're going to make these a filled circle with 75% or so opacity. Next thing we're going to do we'll do is grab the segment and bring that to the row shelf, and the category, the product category, up to the column shelf. And now you can see that we've got furniture running along, or excuse me, category running along the top, and our different customer segments along the left-hand side here. And we can see where things are at for each of those different categories and segments in terms of average sales and average profit. So that's great, but why don't we grab our subcategory and bring that over to our colors, so that way we can see each of those and where they fall in terms of sales and profit. But then let's also go and bring that to the label, so we just have it right there in front of our eyes to see copiers versus machines, and we can understand by each category here. So this is a very quick way to analyze your data. If you've got a couple of different measures and you have a handful of different dimensions and you want to just quickly understand where the outliers might be across a whole bunch of different segments. So a very quick and easy way to analyze two different measures. So let's go ahead and give this a name, scatter plot matrix, and that should be it for that one. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is a pretty quick tip on scatter plots. It's really useful, but kind of not super well known. Took me a little while, so we can just double click on any metric or measure, excuse me, that we have, and you can see that we just get one dot. This is really just all of our sales and all of our profits represented in one dot. Well, a quick trick if you don't want those to be aggregated is to come up here to the analysis menu and uncheck this aggregate measures, and this gives you one point for every row in your data set. So this, I think in this example, it'd be each order, you can look at the profit and sales for each one. And so that's a very quick way if you're finding that you're not able to see all of your different data points. That analysis aggregate measures is a great way to just quickly see all of the data in the data set. So this is going to be called disaggregate scatter plot. And that's just a quick tip for you. Okay, so moving on to some additional kind of formatting tips and tricks for bubble size and the fill color. So for this last tip that I wanted to, or last section that I wanted to share with you, I'm actually going to go back to my scatter plots with the segments worksheet that we created earlier, and this has got the different parameters involved and also the segments and the colors and things like that. So I'm just going to create a duplicate of this, drag it to the end, delete that other sheet. I don't need that one. And this one's going to be formatting tips. And so you can see here, just a quick review, we've got our average measure for metric 1 and metric 2 and our columns and rows correspondingly. We've set our segments up and we have all of our colors set, things like that. Actually going to put this over to internet usage and mobile phone usage. I think that just kind of spreads the data out a little bit more. And I'm also going to remove the reference lines just to show this. So the first thing we're going to do is change our mark type to a shape, and it's going to be an unfilled circle, so no real change there. We're also going to then duplicate each of these, holding down the control key, dragging and dropping it right next to the original. Then on this newly created duplicate, we're going to change the shape to a filled circle and bump down that opacity down to like 25%, somewhere in there. Next thing we'll do is make this a dual axis and finally synchronize the chart and do the same thing on this axis and synchronize that as well. And it looks like we need to remove the label from that one and bring it just to one of those. We don't want it on both measures, we just want it on one of them. And since we have the label there, the country level of detail, we need to bring in country, just put that on there, and now we have those nice filled in circles with a nice dark border. Really like that view. A couple of other formatting tips, we can actually show the mark labels here. A couple of other formatting tips on the labels. So on our first metric, we're going to show mark labels and make that match the mark color. And let's bring that down a little bit and adjust the formatting. So it's kind of a light font there, and we can also adjust the alignment to be right aligned and centered so that things line up very nicely there. Okay, so since we have, so this looks great. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to hide the headers. I don't need to have all this extra stuff. And we're also going to remove the grid lines. Get rid of those. Get rid of those. And we can go back and add in a reference line now if we want. Adjust some formatting additionally here. Bump that down to 8. Make it extra light. And there you go. Remove the header on that one. Now, one thing that you might have noticed is that this average, the header here, or the axis label, just shows average of selected metric 1. It's not really useful. It'd be much better if we just had internet usage on there, or whatever the metric happened to be, and it would change dynamically. So I'll show you how to do that one last here. All you have to do for this is grab your parameter and bring that down to there, so you can see that it says internet usage, and we'll modify that in a second. And then this one, same deal. Bring that to your row section. You can see the mobile phone usage. So if we get rid of that and also hide the label, hide that label, and then if we just format this a little bit, bump that up to 16 and a bold, a little bit darker. And same deal over here, 16, bold, slightly darker, and maybe we rotate that label and expand it a little bit. And there you go. So now we have a really well formatted Tableau scatter plot. Alright, so quick recap. We started off the tutorial here, the guide, looking at basic scatter plots, creating those very quickly, just a few mouse clicks. Then we moved on to dynamic scatter plots using Tableau parameters and some calculated fields to let our audience select any metric that they want. Then we went on to creating segments and how to show those with different colors and reference lines. Then I showed you how to create this time series scatter plot to look for outliers, but also see the trends and how those each data point might actually impact the trend. We looked at a scatter plot matrix to show different data points across a bunch of different categories or dimensions. Showed you a quick tip on how to disaggregate your scatter plot if you're feeling like you're missing some of the data. And we reviewed a handful of formatting tips and tricks to make your scatter plot look awesome. So just to let you know too, I've got a full guide over at newprediction.com/Tableau scatterplots. You can get the full guide, download the full PDF, all the instructions, all the code is available over there. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks.